Canada is one of the world's most developed countries with a stunning nature and a strong economy, where people live in prosperity and peace. There are thousands of square kilometers of untouched nature at your doorstep waiting for you to explore, and Canada is considered to be home of the world's friendliest population. The Canadians know how to organize themselves, and many people could only dream of living in a country like Canada. Nevertheless, as in any country, there are a few drawbacks that you'll need to consider when moving to Canada. As part of my downsides of moving to playlist, I would like to address the drawbacks of moving to Canada in more detail. Canada is an expensive country. Expect to pay over 20% more in Toronto than in Berlin for your living expenses, or about 6% more than in Houston, Texas. Especially housing prices have increased a lot in recent years. Due to a disparity in the demand and supply of homes in Canada, the country has one of the most expensive property markets in the world. Moreover, billions of dollars from abroad were invested to buy up Canadian real estate, driving up prices even more. That's why the Canadian government is about to impose a 2-year ban for foreigners to buy Canadian real estate for speculative reasons. The proposed ban on foreign buyers would exempt permanent residents, as well as those buying their primary residence. But increased real estate prices are also caused by strict regulations, which makes it harder to build new houses. And demand for housing remains high as Canada faces high population growth rates. Living costs outside of Toronto and Vancouver and their outskirts, on the other hand, are significantly lower. To sum up, we can say, if you are interested in moving to Toronto or Vancouver, expect to pay a lot for housing. And you can save some bucks by moving to more rural areas of Canada. While Canada has a surprisingly diverse climate, many parts of the country experience a continental climate with harsh winters. In non-coastal regions, snow can cover the ground for almost 6 months of the year, while in parts of the north, snow can persist all year round. On the west coast, there is a mild climate with rainy winters. In fact, Vancouver is extremely rainy, with almost 50% more rainy days than in London, which itself is known for its bad weather. There are about 168 rainy days a year on average, which means that it rains almost every second day. Especially in winter months, it rains a lot, while summers are more pleasant. On the flip side, Vancouver enjoys 15% more sunshine hours a year compared to London. So to sum it up, if you prefer a continental climate with freezing winters, hot summers and distinct seasons, then moving to parts of Canada that are more land inwards or generally more to the east of Canada makes sense. If you prefer a more mild, stable climate, then the west coast fits better. But beware of the many rainy days, so make sure to bring an umbrella with you. Even though the overall tax burden in Canada is not that large compared to many European countries, Canada still might not be the best country to move to if you are interested in saving some money in taxes. Canada has a progressive tax system that includes federal taxation that is equal throughout the entire country, as well as provincial taxation that differs based on the province you live in. The federal income tax rate is at about 20 to 30% if you make an equivalent of between $37,000 and $160,000. Then there are some additional 15 to 20% of tax burden for provincial taxes, with Quebec having especially high taxes. Sure, Canada has a welfare system and affordable healthcare, but if you are interested in saving some money in taxes, then Canada might not be the best choice. Even though Canada is seen as a country that welcomes a lot of expats, it has been increasingly hard to move to Canada. Around 220,000 expats and other immigrants were allowed to enter the country in 2020, but many more were refused. And some of these more fortunate applicants had to wait years before they were eventually allowed to enter. People who immigrate to Canada have to pass through a rigorous process. In addition, simply flying to Canada can be a tough task. In 2017, 30% of people who applied for a visitor's visa to fly to Canada were rejected. Canada has a skilled worker selection grid, which provides more points to educated immigrants, those who studied in Canada or are fluent in English or French. It favors young applicants and those with family ties to Canada. Don't get me wrong, I think it definitely makes sense to have a standardized procedure for people who want to move to Canada. And I think it's fair to favor people who have invested a lot of time for their education or for learning English or French. Just beware that if you are interested in moving to Canada, then expect to face a rigorous process that may take ages. And even then, you cannot be sure that it will work out. On the flip side, it's good that Canada doesn't follow the same principles as Germany, which just welcomed everybody independently from their profession, education, and even language skills, and has really lost control over who actually moved into the country. As a foreigner, it is not easy to find a job in Canada. According to reports that people wrote on the internet, companies apparently value Western education and work experience more than education from non-Western countries. Not to such a degree as in the US, but it still negatively impacts immigrants. Someone wrote that one of their family friends was a Serbian engineer who had to spend years trying to get the same respect for her qualifications in Canada, and apparently she has to supplement her income up to this day. This is not representative for the entire country, but make sure to do some research about how in demand your profession in Canada is. Even among Canadians, there are opinions that the government's rules are too restrictive. In many surveys, local residents mention that they would prefer fewer rules to follow. Even minor things, such as the amount of fat in a restaurant meal, are determined by the government. Most citizens see Canadian laws as overreaching and would prefer to obey fewer restrictions and less government intervention in their lives. The trucker protests are evidence to the fact that there are quite some Canadians who prefer more individual freedom and less government control. On the other hand, we must not forget that Canada is among the most free countries on a global scale. So compared to many other countries worldwide, Canada has much less rules and restrictions. Domestic flights in Canada are surprisingly expensive. At least before lockdowns, you would need to pay much more for domestic flights in Canada as you would pay in Europe or the US for the same distance. Competition among airlines is much lower than in Europe or the US, which makes prices rise. Some say it's cheaper to fly from Toronto to a city in the US and then to Vancouver, instead of taking a direct flight from Toronto to Vancouver. But when I checked in late September 2022, prices were at $80, which is very affordable considering the distance. I'm not sure if prices stay that low, so it remains to be seen how prices will develop in future. Another downside of Canada is its currency. Since 2010, the Canadian dollar lost 27% of its value against the Swiss franc, 25% against the US dollar, but gained 12% in value relative to the euro. This means that people who save money in Canadian dollar will experience a depreciation in their savings relative to the Swiss franc or the US dollar. The Canadian dollar is still a stable currency, but volatility and slow depreciation is just something to consider. Canada is well known for its public healthcare system. However, you will spend a lot of time waiting for a doctor's meeting. Canadian doctors aren't privately paid like in the US, so they make less money. Many of the Canadian doctors leave for the US to take advantage of the extra money, or they work fewer hours since they don't have the incentive to work overtime. In Canada, doctors are high in demand. Unfortunately, wait times for major surgeries are long. Even trying to get an MRI or CT scan can take months. If you can afford it, there are some private clinics in Canada that will take you. And also check your work benefit plans before moving to Canada to see if they offer you privatized healthcare. If you are interested in moving to Quebec or New Brunswick, then keep in mind that French is the official language. Alongside with English, French is the official language on a federal level, but Quebec only has French defined as their official provincial language. 95% of the population speaks it as either their first or second language. This could make you feel like an outsider if you don't speak French fluently, so you might need some time to adapt. New Brunswick is the only province that has both English and French as its official provincial language. As always, all sources are linked in the video description below. Did I forget a downside? Then please let me know in the comments.